Hello. Um, so I want to discuss, just a heads up, this may be a slightly longer video because there's a lot to discuss, but I want to talk about the Democratic hopefuls for the presidency in 2020. And there's one interesting thing about the American election cycle, and that is that it seems to be constantly rolling. Because if you think about it, let's take a single presidential term, and let's use the Trump administration as an example. 2017 is the inauguration. That's political. 2018 midterms at the end of 2018. That's political. 2019, we're already seeing speculation and announcements of presidential bids. And 2020 is the election year, the primaries, and then culminating in the the presidential election at the end of the year. So there isn't actually a full year which is not part of the election cycle because the midterms are seen as kind of barometer of how well a president is doing. And I know the Democrats made significant gains there. Um, okay, there's a few disclaimers I want to make here. Whenever I make a video about American politics, I always say that I always speculate. Maybe it's my paranoia, but I always think people are going to say, "Oh, mind your own business. This is an American issue. Why are these outsiders sticking their nose into it?" Well, I talk about a lot of issues in a lot of countries on this channel. And what I would simply say is when you are the most powerful country in the world, there is going to be outside interest, especially from allied countries. So, take ownership of that. Take ownership of that because whether you like it or not, when you're the most powerful country in the world, outsiders will be interested. Okay? Because whoever's the American president influences the rest of the world. That's just a fact. We all know that. So, that's that. Anyway, I think it's obvious that the Democrats are going to have to take a different approach from 2016. But before I get into the Democrats, let me talk a bit about President Trump, because we can't avoid the elephant in the room, so to speak. That is the incumbent that the Democratic hopeful will have to go up against. So let's look at one thing. Why did Trump win in 2016? Well, firstly, we shouldn't forget Hillary actually did get more popular votes. So more individual Americans wanted Hillary to win than Donald to win. That's a fact. However, in the American presidential system, it goes by the Electoral College. It doesn't go by popular votes, and it's similar in the UK. But that's the point. Trump won the election, and there's no dispute about that. He won the Electoral College votes, and he picked up states that, I mean, Hillary was the first Democrat to lose, I believe, Wisconsin in in something like 30 years. So that really should send out alarm bells to the Democratic Party. I think Trump managed to effectively get into the heartland. I think I wouldn't say discard the East Coast and the West Coast, but he didn't ignore the Midwest. That's important in terms of electoral votes. So, although we have the issue about delegates in the primary stage, even a state like Wyoming with 500,000 people, it counts just as much as a state like California with 39 million people. So, that's important. And I think that the Democrats have to take that seriously. I mean, I don't know what's going on behind closed doors, but it may well be that Hillary Clinton took that for granted. Now, I think Trump very effectively managed to tap into, frankly, simplicity. Make America great again. I personally don't think it was the best campaign slogan. I rather like Ben Carson's. I liked his whole Lee's hands or this, these hands or that. But the truth is, a lot of American voters like simplicity, a simple message: make America great again. Ronald Reagan used the same one. But there's kind of a short memory in America, and whether they were consciously voting with a Reagan-esque thing in mind, or whether they thought, oh, that sounds good, I don't know. But clearly, Trump was very effective in doing that. Clearly, he was very effective in tapping into anger. He was very good at stirring up animosity against Washington. But to be honest, most candidates do that on both sides. They sort of pitch to standing up to Washington and being an outsider. What I find concerning is that the Trump experience shows someone could get the most powerful job in the world with no political experience. That is astonishing to me. Absolutely astonishing. Trump had never been a senator. He'd never been a governor. He'd never been a general. Nothing. Just a businessman. And his success as a businessman is dubious. So that's just astonishing to me. But he is the president, and that's just the way it is. Um, so I'm just going to have a very brief overview of the Trump presidency so far. It's very, very difficult to know what direction this presidency is going because it's very difficult to know what Trump really believes. What I see is a disconnect between Donald Trump, the man, and the State Department. Take, for example, last year when there was major tensions between Britain and Russia. Um, the United States, being an allied nation, naturally backed the UK, and they have their own issues with Russia, it goes without saying. So I appreciate that the American State Department took a very hard line on that and expelled Russian diplomats, a record number, incidentally. So they took a tough line. And yet we have Donald Trump reaching out to Vladimir Putin, praising Vladimir Putin, or at least, put it this way, he will not criticize Putin in the way that he denigrates allied leaders. He denigrates Justin Trudeau, he denigrates Theresa May, um, or at least he embarrasses Theresa May. I mean, this is a man who basically insults allied nations, makes things up. He lied about our NHS, which caused a lot of anger here on both sides of the aisle. Um, I mean, it's like a walking wrecking ball. And I think Trump supporters are kind of blind to reality because they're so fixated on Trump getting re-election, and he might well get re-election. I'm not disputing that, but they just totally disregard what the rest of the world sees. And I'm not saying that the rest of the world is against Trump. I know that he has supporters in India, he has supporters in other countries. But if you look at the academic rankings of presidents, now this is, I should put a caveat here, it's perhaps unfair to judge an incumbent president whilst he's still in office. Nevertheless, the results are telling. In the latest results, if you look at Wikipedia presidential rankings, Trump is at the very bottom, below James Buchanan, below Millard Fillmore, below Andrew Johnson, the worst president in American history. Now, his supporters will say, oh, it's just academics, they're part of the elite. Let's disregard that. I think it probably is unfair to judge that during a presidency. As George W. Bush said, these things are better done retrospectively. And I believe actually Bush's opinion polling will slightly increase. I don't think Bush will ever be seen as a great president, but I do think history will treat him somewhat kinder. Um, so I don't think it's fair to judge a sitting president. Nevertheless, there are things that he has done that already open up the history books. It's been a very busy administration. I'll give Trump that. But is it busy in the right way? That's the question. This is the president who has reached out to dictators like Kim Jong Un. Now, at the time, I wanted to be fair. I thought, okay, well, this could be a major diplomatic coup for Trump. But it appears that he was basically taken for a ride. There's been very little optimistic sign that North Korea is changing its course. So it appears that Singapore summit, Trump was taken for a ride. Helsinki, I happen to believe he was being used by Putin. And I find it deeply troubling that Donald Trump has almost word for word echoed the narrative of the Kremlin. I know his supporters get very testy about this and they have this knee jerk reaction like, oh, it's all fake news. But my gut feeling is there is very real interference going on in American politics from Russia. And much Democrat versus Republican, I think Russia's probably playing both sides. That's my gut feeling. Um, and Trump's not the only figure on the right that's been taken in by Russia. Tucker Carlson on Fox News has basically churned out the Russia Assad line, and he insists that he's not pro Putin, he's not pro Assad. But you just have to look at the videos of Tucker Carlson. The sort of responses are pro Putin and pro Assad. So, to be fair to Tucker Carlson, I don't think he is actually pro Russia, pro Assad, but I do think he's being used. And he's being very gullible in not realizing that there's nothing in theory wrong with the questions he's asking. But by refusing to condemn Russia's brutality in Syria, Tucker Carlson is frankly looking like a useful idiot. And if you look at those videos, they're lined up with people who vilify anyone that's debating against Tucker Carlson. That proves the point. It proves that the Russian trolls are out in force. Um, a lot of Trump's supporters are obviously not paid Russian bots. That's clear. But I also think they're incredibly naive about what the Russian threat is. They just think it's all made up by the Democrats and fake news. They're being incredibly naive. I come from a country that Russia has already targeted directly. Um, Russia poisoned a man on our streets. As far as I'm concerned, that's an attack on the United Kingdom. Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia armed rebels that shot down a Dutch plane, killing almost 300 people. Russia has propped up a murderous, barbaric regime that gasses children. I mean, anyone that cannot see that Russia is a threat to world peace. And here's the thing: they always put the I don't want to get derailed, but they always put the onus on the sitting American president or the sitting British prime minister. Putin has now been in office for almost 20 years. So it's a bit of a phony argument to say, oh, well, it must be the Americans' fault, it must be the British fault. The problem comes when Putin is in power, because that brief period Medvedev was in power, there was sort of a slight improvement in relations. I think that's saying something. The problem is Putin. Um, and I find it deeply troubling that Trump denigrates allies. He denigrates Western alliances like NATO, and he lies about that. Incidentally, when he's called out on it, he just lies about it. Um, and yet he has no problem praising foreign dictators like Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. I find that deeply troubling. And yet the State Department, like I say, has made the right moves. The American government took tough action against Assad, which I supported. Trump took tough action against Assad, but it's almost like there's two Trumps going on here. And I know Time Magazine used that cover for George Bush, the two George Bushes, Bush Senior, but I cannot work out what Trump's agenda is. It's very hard to work out what Trump's worldview is because there's so much contradiction. So that's very obvious. I think his utter lack of diplomacy, it's not telling it like it is. It shows an utter lack of class. I mean, when he talks about shithole countries, who can rationally justify that? Even if they are, we know the sort of countries he's talking about are really broken countries. But is calling them shithole countries really the way to approach that? Really? And this is a man who has come out with a long string of insults and denied them. I mean, the way he disrespected John McCain, the way he constantly questioned Obama's birth was absolutely disgusting, in my opinion. And people say, oh, but that was the past. The point is, it just goes on and on and on. And here's the thing: Trump versus the media, this is my take on it. I think on some level, there is a problem with the media. There is absolutely bias at CNN, no question about it. No question about it. And I do think there's a major problem in America with a lack of accountability in the media. There's no independent watchdogs to call them out. That is a serious problem. So they say we hold the powerful to account. I would want to retort and say, well, who holds you to account? I think there is arrogance in all media outlets, in CNN and Fox, in the New York Times, you name it. There's profound arrogance. And the reason is that punditry has become more important than just reporting the news. That's a serious problem. So I do think that Trump versus the media has opened up a debate about that. That's a good thing. But What Trump does is he basically distorts every question directed towards him, every scrutiny as being fake news. That is very dangerous because it's playing right into the hands of RT and the Kremlin. I mean, this idea that every difficult question, oh, it must be fake news, that's just preposterous. Um, Last night, a BBC cameraman was assaulted at a Trump event. I mean, this is the sort of thing that the BBC used to face in countries like China. Now it's happening in the United States. And the guy was removed, but that's coming about as a direct result of Trump stirring up hatred towards the media collectively. They're all fake news. This is incredibly dangerous behavior because I would have no problem if Trump was saying they're not giving me a fair ride. I just want fair treatment. But he's not. He's saying they're just all fake news and that's it. So he's inciting this hatred among his supporters. And you can see that. You can see the results of it. I think that's a really big problem. By the same token, these big media networks also have to show some humility and, tone down their blatant bias. It's like a vicious cycle. Um, okay, so that's the Trump side of things. Trump is unpredictable. Trump is very hard to work out. I think domestically speaking, I can't comment in great detail. I understand the economy is doing well. That's a big thing for Americans, understandably so. And if he does get re-elected, that may be the main reason. Um, but the gun issue, I have strong views about that. I can never get my head around the American rights attitude to guns, and it isn't even the American right as a whole. I cannot get my head around how you can have so many mass shootings, so many people killed, and those mass shootings aren't even the bulk of gun fatalities. They're a small fraction of overall gun fatalities. But how can you can have so much violence, and the attitude is, oh well, very sad. Let's say a few prayers and move on, and not accept that easy access to guns is a major part of the equation. Trump, like a lot of Republican presidents, all he has done is nodded to the gun lobby. It's disgraceful, it's cowardly, and those marches last year, those brave young people who took to the streets after Parkland. Um, Trump's attitude was to say, "Oh, we're sorry for the loss, but I'm going to continue nodding to the NRA." I think that's utterly despicable, and it's something that I do not understand about the American gun lobby because they're utterly paranoid. They talk about sensitivity. This is an interesting thing. They talk about snowflakes and sensitivity, but as soon as anyone mentions gun control, it's like, oh, they're going to take away your guns. It's, I love the United States, but it's one aspect of America I can never get my head around. And I don't see it changing under the Trump presidency, sadly. I mean, I don't think there'll be a situation where there will be no gun violence. I think that's impossible. But it cannot be the norm where you have mass shooting after mass shooting, and there's this knee-jerk reaction like, "Oh, but it's taking away the guns from law-abiding gun owners." No, it's not. No, it's not because I'm yet to see a law-abiding gun owner having their firearms taken away. It's this incredible paranoia with the gun lobby. It just pisses me off um, because it's just unnecessary. Anyway, I think Trump's been very weak on that. And I think that's where Democrats are a lot stronger. Now, let me get to the Democrats because I've been talking about Trump for a long time. There are a lot of people in the field. Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar made her announcement in the snow in Minnesota. Like I say, the Midwest is going to be very important. Um, who else is there out there? Sherrod Brown, Beto O'Rourke, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden. It goes on and on. I don't think age is as big a factor here as it was in the past. Trump is the oldest president ever. Hillary Clinton was approaching 70. Bernie Sanders was old. I think it's less of an issue than it was in the past. I mean, back when Bob Dole was running, that was a big, big thing. But now I think it's probably a good thing because it means that they're, well, it's, ageism is less of an issue. People are living longer. So that's a good thing. However, it goes without saying that if someone does get the nod, they would need to be in absolute robust physical health. Um, with the pressure that comes with that position. Because in the Reagan presidency, there was already signs that he was showing of Alzheimer's, and there's even been signs that Trump has shown memory loss. I saw a video where he'd forgotten a whole range of names. That was, it may seem like a trivial thing, but when you have access to the nuclear button, I think it's important. Joe Biden, I think he's going to face an uphill struggle, not because of his age, but because creepy Uncle Joe, that may be a real issue. At the moment, it's not an issue on the Democratic side. They're kind of ignoring it. But there is a growing movement online exposing these videos showing Biden and, frankly, very, to put it mildly, inappropriate physical contact with young women. I mean, he does not know personal barriers. That's putting it mildly. So I think that will really come up, and I think that might be the reason why Biden himself hasn't announced a formal bid because I think he knows it. I think he knows it'll be used against him, um, and that's interesting because he probably is the biggest name out there. Elizabeth Warren is a big name. She's announced her bid. Um, One guy that I'm kind of looking at, Andrew Yang, he's an entrepreneur from New York. He's not well known around the country. He's not a nationwide name at this point, but he's proposed universal policy, I believe, of giving every American $1,000. It's kind of an experiment. It's been done in some European countries. That could be interesting. And he doesn't strike me as loony left. He's an entrepreneur, he's a businessman, and it goes without saying he would be the first Chinese American president. Unfortunately, I don't think America's ready for that. I'm quite interested in the guy. I'm going to follow his campaign. I'll see how it goes. Let me just say at this point, obviously, I'm not American. If I was American, I probably would be an independent. What I dislike about the Democrats is how they pitch to divisive identity politics, which I really have a big problem with. I think one problem with the Clinton campaign, well, there were many problems with it, but one problem was she really focused on elect me because I'm a woman. And I thought her retort, oh, I didn't get elected because I was a woman, was frankly the rhetoric of a sore loser. Um, that's insulting the millions of men who did vote for her. During the Clinton campaign, Madeleine Albright came out. There's a special place in hell for women who don't vote for Hillary. So if the nominee is a woman, she should learn from that and not use this aggressive feminist thing of vote for me because I'm a woman, or use that as her pitch. I think one reason Obama was successful is because he didn't pitch on being an African American. It was part of his campaign, but previous African American, well, technically mixed race in his case, but previous African American candidates had went on that line of being the first African American. Obama managed to get mainstream. That's why he was elected. Hillary basically did focus on I'm a woman. Um, so I think if it's Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren or Kirsten Gillibrand, if they use an overly aggressive, militant, feminist narrative, it will polarize male voters. It will polarize a lot of women as well. I think it would be a big mistake. Um, I think they also need to recognize that there are real security concerns in the United States. Um, and I think people get very angry with this idea that if you have control on immigration, that's somehow racist. So I know Beto O'Rourke made a counter rally to Trump's in El Paso the other night, and it may be that he was trying to put his name on the map by using very moderate sort of language about, oh, it's all rhetoric. We build America, America not, we build a better America not because of walls, but in spite of them. And, that's great for pitching to the base. But I think to get wider appeal, I mean, let's say Beto O'Rourke does get further ahead, he will need to convince Americans that he takes national security seriously. And I think the Democrats are failing to do that because they're so outspoken against Trump, like the travel ban and so on, that they're failing to recognize where Trump is getting support in those areas. So they need to convince people that actually a country does need security, a country does need borders. That's important. And if they fail to do that, they're not going to get re-elected. I think also it shouldn't be about identity politics. People shouldn't vote on what a candidate looks like. But say, for example, you have a ticket that is a woman and a minority, that's just going to look like they're trying to pitch to identity politics. I think they need to have a white man on the ticket. It sounds shallow. It shouldn't be that way. But basically, I think the left has started this culture war. They've started this thing about identity politics. Um, so it's kind of they're reaping the seeds that they have sowed. They have caused a division in terms of making everything about race, about gender. I'm not saying the right is immune from it, far from it, but I do think the left is more guilty of treating people as demographics rather than individuals. Although I think the media plays a very big part in this as well. I always hear like, what about the Hispanic voters? What about women voters? What about male voters? And it's going on the assumption that everyone thinks the same. It's going on the assumption that all Hispanics think the same, all Asian Americans think the same, you name it. And yes, you can get trends with demographics, but I think that is divisive by nature, and I've got a big problem with it. Um, I think the media has a lot to answer for in terms of stirring up racial animosity. They will say they're just telling it like it is, but they have the choice over how they report stories, and I think they've got a lot to answer for, a lot. And again, that's where I think media accountability is a major issue. But the Democrats are in a difficult position because I wouldn't expect them to be like a clone copy of Trump in order to beat Trump. I think that's obviously stupid because they're meant to be the opposition, they're meant to be the anti Trump. But they also need to understand where Trump got support. So I think if they push identity politics too hard, it's just going to polarize millions of white voters in the Midwest, especially white male voters. And if they don't understand that, they're not going to get reelected. So someone like Kamala Harris, for example, I understand she's been a lawyer, she has been a tough prosecutor. Something like that could be helpful because it would counter the narrative that the Democrats are soft on crime. Um, so they need to look at that sort of situation. Someone like Sherrod Brown, a Democrat who can win a red state, and he's a white man, could be interesting. I don't know much about him, so I can't comment in great detail. You know, that sort of approach would be a good one, and it wouldn't sell their core values. For example, I would want to see the Democrats still being outspoken about gun violence. I would want to see them still countering a lot of Trump's narrative, but I think they need to understand why they lost. And divisive political correctness and identity politics backfires. They need to, I mean, put it this way, actors have a right to their opinion. But basically, what it looks like right now is the Democratic Party is listening to Hollywood and listening to these virtue signaling actors and not American people who are struggling. I think that is, or even it's not even a case of struggling because I understand the economy is doing better, but it will just tie into the Democrats or establishment. That's why a candidate from the Midwest might be strong. I don't know. It's good. It's just very early days. But whoever gets that nomination, they'll have a tough balancing act because they have to be vocally anti-Trump, and they have to. It goes without saying, and they have to be obviously different from Trump. But at the same time, they have to tap in to some of Trump's supporters and say, well, actually, we understand these concerns. So it's a real tough balancing act. Anyway, this has been a very long video. That was inevitable because there was a lot to discuss. I'll conclude with this. I'm an outsider. All of these things are just my opinions. I'm not telling anyone who the president should be. So I don't want anyone to think that. But like I say, there is going to be interest in American politics from the outside. Personally, I consider America an ally. I am not a fan of President Trump, but I try to be fair to President Trump. Um, I don't agree with those who say that Trump is a bigger threat to world peace than China or Russia. I don't agree with those who think that Trump is more evil than the likes of ISIS and MS-13. I think that's delusional. Um, and I also think there's an interesting situation now with this crisis in Venezuela. There are a number of Hispanic American Democrats in states like Florida who are saying, I don't know what her name was, but she spoke out yesterday and said that the Democrats need to back the president in the Venezuela issue. I mean, Nicolas Maduro made a plain lie on the BBC when he said no Venezuelans are starving. He just lied through his teeth, just like Butcher Assad. So I think the Democrats, where the president is right, and I believe he's right on Venezuela, then the Democrats need to back him because otherwise they will just look petty and it will look like they're playing petty party politics. As for the US government shutdown, I find it staggering that can happen um, in the world's most powerful country, that the government can shut down. It causes no end of problems for people on welfare payments. And yeah, so I hope that doesn't happen again. Anyway, this is all for Americans to debate, but there will be close outside interest. Thanks for watching.